And going live, going live, going live. Boom! According to that, I am live. Welcome. This is Tokyo Tonight. I'm Hiko Simon. I am back. I have been away since, according to my calendar, September 4. So just about a whole month, actually. Um, yeah, because I was in family imposed quarantine when I got back last week. So I was staying in a hotel with crappy Wi-Fi. So pretty much missed September, which I apologize for. But at the same time, it was nice to have a break. It was really nice to get back to New Zealand. It's nice as a New Zealander to have an address in the country I still consider to be my home country. It's funny to have a country that you call home where you don't have a home per se. I have I had a grandmother who I stayed with when I was taking my bar exam and qualification course in New Zealand, and she passed away. So that's where I went back to New Zealand. She passed away last year, but at the time, New Zealand was completely locked down, even for domestic travel. So although my father had just returned to New Zealand for the first time in over 20 years, he couldn't even visit the funeral, which was in Christchurch. So we had a memorial service, which was great, but also I got finally, because New Zealand just opened up, to go down and see my dad, who lives now in the far north of New Zealand, where I've never lived before. So, again, I now have a home in my home country, but it's in a place I've never lived before. It's like being from, the analogy I suppose would be being from like New York, or growing up in Texas and living in New York, and your parents moved back to America, but they live in Florida, and you've never been there before. So on the one hand, it was going home, and on the other hand, I got to explore, actually see a lot of new places. In New Zealand in particular, actually, the far north is kind of, Maori populated New Zealand. They colonized New Zealand from the north down, and because it was better weather and it was easy to grow everything, that was always actually where the original capital was. All the history of New Zealand really starts from up there. So it's actually a really great part of the country. It's got the best weather in New Zealand. So that was really, really cool. And it was really great to reconnect with New Zealand. I'm hesitant to say I'm a New Zealander at times because I'm really painfully self aware of the fact I've been away for 23 years. And, the New Zealand that I know is really different, and really, old. I mean, it's literally Back to the Future. It's getting on those kind of timescales of imagine 1955 to, I mean, it's not quite, it's 23 years instead of 30 years, but 1985 traveling back to 1955. It's literally on that kind of a time scale. Imagine being from 1955 and traveling forward 30 years, or doing the 1985 to 2015, which we've all actually, well, not all of us, but many of us have actually done. It's a bit like that now, going back to New Zealand. So I feel like everyone's on hoverboards and stuff. um, but that said, it was really nice getting back. It was really nice to sort of reconnect with my New Zealandness a little bit, what little there is left. Also, I love going to Singapore. That was for work, but in Singapore, I posted some Instagrams and so on. I got to go running, including some group runs with some friends from work and some other people, which was great. Also got to reconnect with my childhood a little bit down there. I really, the reason I'm in Japan is because I lived in Singapore when I was a kid. I lived inside a Singaporean army camp where New Zealand army officers were allowed to live. New Zealand housing existed in Sembawang in the far north of Singapore. Yeah, my dad was a major at the time, and because of that, we got put up in nice housing inside of a Singaporean camp at Nisun Camp, also in the north of the island. And taking that school bus route every day through these sort of Hokkien neighborhoods in the north of Singapore, where there was like just Chinese all over the place, written everywhere, and it was very bustling and exciting and totally different to living in state housing in rural New Zealand and Australia growing up. The rest of my growing up, I always wanted to go back and be in an energetic Asian place. And to that end, I really wanted to learn Chinese. I've said this before on the show. In New Zealand, there was no opportunity to learn Chinese, but when I heard that Japanese uses Chinese characters, and I had the only choice of school subjects I had when I started high school, where Latin was mandatory, and this was at a public school, this was not private. Latin was mandatory for some reason. The only choice we had was French or Japanese. And I figured, well, I really want to learn Chinese, but, Japanese has Chinese characters, and I always wanted to learn those characters, so I'll do Japanese. And everything, the homestays and well, Japan seems pretty cool. I'll run with that. That's what I ended up doing, and that's basically what led to me ending up living here and having Tokyo Tonight. So basically, me living in this particular neighborhood between being about 6 and 8 years old in Singapore in the early 1980s. It's the whole reason that I'm here learning Japanese. I mean, it's kind of a mistake, I know, but that's why I'm here. So all of that time, I'd never been back to the army camp, which of course I'm not allowed into. In fact, you're not even allowed to take photos of the army camp, although I did from a long distance. Please don't arrest me. Singapore next time I go back. Literally, it was just the gate, but I used to go through that checkpoint every day. Our armors, the only place we could have housekeepers. Yeah, two of them were like arrested, had their passports taken away, coming to, help us out. The security was tight. But not very much it remains from when I was there as a kid, but it was just really nice to go back there and just sort of exactly, it was touching the point, just remembering that was a place that really had a big impact on the direction of my life. So that was super cool. And then I come back a week, and this whole time I haven't been tweeting much. It's been nice having a break from YouTube and so on. And nothing ever happens when I go on vacations. I mean, what happened? Hardly anything, right? The Queen died. Abe's funeral took place, the country reopened, nothing of significance worth talking about, of course, but I did stumble through the news stories of the last 3 weeks, which was actually easy because I hadn't tweeted very much, so I'm admittedly a little bit behind, but that was cool. When I got back, one thing I really felt when I was traveling, that at the moment, of course, Japanese, and Japanese residents can travel abroad, and thank heavens they changed the requirement that you don't need a PCR to come back in. If you're triple vaxxed, which I am. I know a couple of people who got their third vaccination. They didn't want to get it. A lot of people really don't like, the vaccinations really caused pretty severe side effects for a lot of people. And that made, I know people who have been hesitant about getting the third shot, but they got it because they didn't want to do a PCR where you're really rolling the dice about, coming back into the country. So that took a lot of the stress off. Oh, and I must say as well, being in New Zealand for a week, like with no masks, I mean, I was practically on a farm. My dad's house is practically a farm. And I got comfortable pretty quickly going everywhere with no mask, except you keep a mask in your pocket and you put it on when you go into a shop. But we hardly went to any shops. So that was actually, I pretty much went the whole week outside running, and it was winter. So you feel the cold air on your face. It was really nice. The one thing that did alarm me, however, was getting on a domestic flight on a packed 737 from Auckland to Christchurch and looking at all the faces on that plane being unmasked and thinking, oh, this doesn't feel right. But Singapore as well, it's not been weird going back to masking. I don't mind doing that, although I'm noticing slightly less. It's still around where I live is still easily more than 90% masking. But I do see slightly more people being brave, walking around without a mask. Still mostly foreigners doing it, but more Japanese people doing it. So I think that's a sign that Japan's slowly easing up on that. But I don't want to stand out in a bad way, even though I don't really care. So I am wearing a mask still everywhere. But yeah, it was nice to experience being without masks, which I think is what the future is going to look like. However, the other thing that I noticed when I was traveling was I am poor. I mean, not only have, of course, wages gone up and inflation's gone up and everything abroad, while nothing's changed here pretty much, although prices have started to go up lately. But of course, with the yen being so devaluated at the moment, like 35% against the US dollar, and even against other currencies, it was pretty devalued. Everything, it felt like being a New Zealand backpacker in the 1990s all over again, where I was traveling everywhere, but the income and the money that I had didn't go very far, and I just had to be very frugal where I was traveling, thinking, yeah, if I got a job here, I could have a great life and enjoy all of this stuff. And I was feeling like that probably the most I've ever felt, having a Japanese bank account and traveling and just thinking everything here is like too expensive. Food was great. Doing it simple is fine, but the idea of shopping for something to take back, like clothes or, electronics, just didn't make sense. Everything was so expensive, so that was weird. However, when I got back, my iPhone, which I now pretty much have, my old iPhone, my XS, which I now have in a protective case permanently, although it's a little bit late for that. But I think I can take this out. I did drop it like the week before I left, after having it for 4 years, and I would run with it in a holder on my arm naked. I didn't even have like a film over the screen, and I would take it out of my protective case and put it into a holder on my arm. And yeah, it dropped out like a week before I went traveling. So lately, this is my iPhone. I don't know if you can see that very well, but it is cracked. It's usable, but it's really, really annoying. So that was an incentive for me to finally upgrade after 4 years. So I've got now my iPhone 14 Pro, which I love. It's not a dramatic upgrade, but it is nice. I do like the permanently on thing. The other thing that I did for the first time was boom, I got this lovely Apple Watch, and I got the Ultra. I figured rather than get the SE and then buy multiple watches and slowly upgrade, I knew if I got it, I'd get it for running. I just want to get a good one. I want to get one with a cellular that I don't need to carry a phone when I run. So I just went for it, and I got the expensive one. I got both of these when I got back. They are not cheap at the moment, but yeah, I figured I waited 4 years on the phone upgrade, so I did all of that. So I'm quite enjoying those little purchases since I got back and setting those up. But yeah, and also, of course, those of you who follow closely will be aware that I did a kind of quasi impromptu. I've been talking with Rochelle Kopp for a long time about doing a show together, talking about her activism a little bit, and specifically I felt a little bit guilty. On the one hand, I would retweet her petitions and so on, but I never felt as passionate or worked up about some of the issues that she was very passionate and worked up about. And I felt like that was slightly a reflection of my own bad character. I definitely respect what she does, but at the same time, I would feel disingenuous acting enthusiastic about issues that I didn't feel enthusiastic about. But I thought, we started tweeting talking about this sort of stuff, and I said, I'm sorry I haven't been enthusiastically supporting everything, although I've been sharing what you've been doing. And I said, it's just I personally, I'm just not that that deeply into these sort of issues, but maybe you can explain it to me. And she sort of started to, and I realized, wait, let's do this live, because honestly, I have a flippant, really not very invested view in this at all, and I'm in a position to easily be convinced, and I could tell that she would be very convincing. So I said, that's perfect for a show. Let's do that for a show. And we did that last night. And yeah, it was a great chat. And she, as expected, was extremely thorough and well prepared, and explained everything. I think she was very tolerant of me, maybe being a little bit too argumentative at times, but that's all part of the fun. And I did actually learn quite a lot, and I did respect. I did. I still don't agree necessarily on every aspect with which she opposes the Meiji Gaien redevelopment, but yeah, I did find some things which, yeah, I was really surprised that it was done in that particular way, and that is a problem. So I found some grounds that, yeah, I can support. So that was actually a really good chat, so that's worth checking out. It's a long watch, of course, but you can do that. But anyway, that's what's been going on in updates. Let's go into the topics, because I missed you guys. Let's see, we've got 17 viewers at the moment and 6 likes, so do remember to like if you liked. Wow, and we've got some chat revenue, some super chats. Wow, that is awesome. I will catch up right now and find where that's from, but that is awesome. Thank you. I'll get myself a tasty beverage. Dan H first, you are first. Odie Jr., that's just outside at the top of the screen. Odie Jr. is second, but that's all good. We've got Shivers, never fear, because Yabba Dabba Doo, our man from Panama, enjoying a lovely morning there. Good to have you in here. Buenos dias. Sainted Sir, knew that there was a boom happening. Yes, indeed. Dan H mentioning that there is a Japanese version of me called Junichi Nishimura, who moved to Auckland, New Zealand in the late 80s and became a lawyer. In fact, if he became a lawyer in New Zealand, he's ahead of me, because I never became a Japanese lawyer. I was always a New Zealand lawyer practicing in Japan. So, yeah, Junichi Nishimura sounds like a cool guy. I must admit, I am feeling more inclined, especially having been the most social I've been in 2 years lately, and without masks. On top of that, well, to yeah, actually, I feel like we're getting close towards doing some sort of a meetup. I really do want to do a meetup sometime. But yeah, I'd love to hear more about that person sometime. Ed Avoid, good morning, Arizona. Good to see you. Quint Rankin, good to have you in here as always. We've got Mr. Cordy Chep, made it for once. Made it for all the time. Oh, some butter. Nice to have some butter money there. Thank you, Dan H. Do appreciate that always. Let me scroll back up and find out where it just jumped ahead there. Smash the like button, says Shubus. Yes, do that thing. We've got Ian McCauley. Good to have you. Good morning, Ian McCauley. All these people in the morning. I'm here in the middle of the night, but that's what's cool about this show, is seeing where everybody is tuning in from. And do say hello, and do say where you're joining us from, because I just do love that sense of how we've got a pretty good spread of countries here. Kuber's Tenshi, time for TT, time for coffee and cookies. Yeah, that sounds pretty good indeed. Butter, more better indeed, says Shubus. Dan H has a recommended podcast and ended finding a female version of me. Catherine O'Connell. I know Catherine O'Connell. Yes, she's a half Kiwi. Is she half Kiwi and half Aussie? I didn't know that she was half Australian. Yeah, we all have our dark sides, and I indeed am also half Australian. So there you go. She does a really good podcast and talking to lawyers in Japan indeed. Yeah, I think she particularly talks to women lawyers, and yeah, she's got a wonderful practice. She's very, very cool. Indeed, that's a good one, Dan H. Sainted Sir, boom, good to, indeed. It is boom time. We've got Believe in Yourself. Interesting, good to have you in here. Kuber's Tenshi, by the way, everybody remember, do what Kuber's Tenshi just did. If you want to get my attention with a comment or a request for a topic, just say my name, like Kuber's Tenshi. It will flash orange, and when I'm scanning through the comments in between stories, it will stand out. So that is awesome. Scrolling down, trying to make sure I don't miss anybody, although I always miss somebody. DJ Sunnyside, oh, Damaster, hey, what's up, everyone? Hey, what's up, Damaster? Good to have you here in the comments. 10 likes, 23 views at the moment. Good to have you. We've got DJ Sunnyside up. Great to see you. Loving this cooler weather, eh? Yes. I mean, 29 still kind of hot, although we have some genuinely like 22 and 18 degrees coming this week. There's going to be a bit of a cold change, so we're finally going to get autumn. But yeah, as someone who likes to go out running and someone who appreciates the cleaner air that you get when things cool down, yes, I am enjoying this quite a lot. And the weather, we're now getting into the season. It's just sort of chopping and changing at the moment, but definitely from October, pretty much through early January is pretty much the best weather of the year anywhere in Japan, but particularly in Tokyo. It's pretty dry and sunny and great weather. All of a sudden you can see Mount Fuji. Late January it starts to get a little bit choppy, and spring isn't great, especially if you have allergies. But we are now getting into, we are moving from the worst time of year, the hot misery that we had for 2 months, where it was above 35 degrees, like 100 degrees Fahrenheit, like every day for 2 months, to where it is now actually quite pleasant. So yes, indeed, best time of the year. Totally agree, DJ Sunnyside up. Good surfing weather as well, I imagine. I hope you're getting out there. Mask saves on foundation. It does indeed, although that's not a problem I've had recently. I could probably use some at the moment. I didn't shave today. Sorry about that. Yes, that's the problem with using a high resolution camera. Dan H, thank you indeed. Again, you don't have to do that, but I do appreciate it. And yeah, that's a good one. Yes, I mean, thank you for that anyway. And again, it's all the more reason I hope we can do a meetup sometime. Dan H, 4 pounds of butter is nice. Yes, especially if it's in weight. You might enjoy guessing. In fact, actually, Kuber's Tenshi got the joke about 10 minutes before I did. So well done. Saw last night's show. Shivers liked the show last night. Well, I'm glad you did. Steve Miller. Wow, we have the voice of America himself. Great to have you in here. Greetings and salutations. Awesome. Yes. I wish I had his voice, but there again, I'd probably be kicked out of this apartment doing this late at night if I did, because it's just got such great projection. I have to go with kind of husky and doesn't not talking to people enough kind of a voice, but yes, indeed. Coffee and caffeinated solutions. Yes, all very good there. We've got a Key Ranger. Yes. Tokyo 503, welcome back. Yes, thank you. Great to be back. And thank you for the welcome. Theodore Sharp, what's up? Not much, man. I'm seriously just catching up. And it's, yeah, it's good to be hanging out here with you. So everybody in here, I think I'm caught up on comments. Do say hello. If you haven't said hello yet, there's 21 concurrent viewers, slightly less than before. Do like, because that's pretty much all that I'm doing it for, is, pretty much just likes and attention. I'm not monetizing the vids. I just do this for the love of it, and I do it because I enjoy you all keeping me company. And otherwise, I'd probably be doing this without an internet connection in a mental institution. So yes, you're keeping me on the straight and narrow, and I do appreciate that. It is 10:51 p.m. Japan Standard Time, so let's dive into the topics. And yeah, do what Theodore Sharp did. Just say hello in the comments anytime. 3 weeks. Yeah. And you know what? I think I I think I have covered off the big news stories, so I can comment on those as we go through. But yes, the big story, of course, of the last month was the story of the enormous squid, and the 13-meter long giant squid monument from, now this was from Fukui Prefecture, I believe. Um, and it was funny, Ishikawa on the Kanazawa Prefecture, anyway, on the Japan Sea of Japan side, where famous for squids, including finding giant squids now and again. And yeah, when the government gave them economic stimulus to spend on projects for stimulating the economy for COVID, and they built an enormous squid statue. It was kind of the poster child for governments frivolously wasting Japanese COVID money. And there was at the time people saying this is like the pinnacle of ridiculousness of abuse of taxpayer money that's intended for struggling people. However, all of the news attention and criticism of the Noto Peninsula squid led to a tourism surge and an economy around the squid statue that paid off 22 times the value of the donation, which was something like $600,000, but is estimated to have had an economic effect that I'm sure is in here of 5 million. So there you go. So the construction cost of roughly $240,000 has been converted into $4.58 million US of economic stimulus for the region. So, and hell, I want to go see this thing. And I said that at the time. You can see it on this show. I've been consistent on this. I thought that was awesome. Actually, I really appreciated Noto doing that, and it's great to see that actually did pay off. And yes, credit to Noto on that decision, and thank you, awesome squid statue. Again, going back like a long way now, September 3. So yeah, as expected, Taro Kono has been, I've got a few stories in here about digital transformation. I think there's another story that I've put in here about how Japan is still lagging on analog and digital transformation rankings, which I'll talk about more specifically a bit later on. This is kind of what I hope for from Taro Kono, and a little bit what I fear about having Taro Kono as the digital minister. Taro Kono is great at converting any portfolio that he is given into a personal press opportunity, which he does not just by stupid self-promotion, but he actually figures out attention-grabbing actions that he can take that are seen as making a meaningful difference. And there's no, when he was given administrative reform, he tried to eliminate pointless paperwork and procedures. And even when he was kind of sent to the gulag of being the LDP press secretary when he lost his bid to become prime minister, even then he basically turned the LDP accounts, Twitter accounts, into something that was at times humorous and worth following, and that was at times even critical of the government and saying, yeah, I don't know what they're thinking. And then they brought him back into the fold as a digital minister. And what I like about him is that he's got a track record of being in tune with common sense, which seems rare for politicians in Japan, and picking out demonstrable things to get done. And he's done this with his campaign on faxes and hankos, and now he's discovered that there are 1,900 rules requiring that the government use floppy disks. That he says that we're going to amend all of those rules to allow, for example, storage using saving to cloud storage and means other than floppy disks, which you can't even buy really in shops anymore. So I think it's good to have these kind of visible targets and goals that you can, that are measurable and achievable, and that he does them. However, at the same time, the real problems of Japan's digital transformation, which I'll go into in more detail a little bit later on, really are much bigger and much more structural. They really are about the dominance of tech companies, which in the past lifted Japan up and made it a world leader in technology, but now have kind of locked Japan in to old legacy technology, literally using floppy disks, and have kind of a vested interest in, preventing, if they go into new technology, then there can be competition for those custom legacy systems and so on. And that's what's really holding Japan back at the moment. It's ironically the technology companies that once lifted Japan up are now holding it down. and confronting those. And the thing is, there's no easy measurable metric around that. There are things you can do that I think will contribute to the breaking up of that kind of cartel that exists around tech services in Japan, and is taking advantage of the government. But these things all help towards that. But that's the real problem, and I hope he figures out a way to confront that in a way that's attention grabbing and garners support. But these are also good steps, which I applaud. So good on him. Another thing, again, the only thing worse than the LDP is everything other than the LDP is the old, is a paraphrase of an often said phrase that particularly the opposition, and I look back nostalgically on the time that Hatoyama was prime minister, because basically uh, it was a short period where a bunch of opposition groups who never before and frankly never since were ever able to agree to put their differences aside, make a plan, and try as hard as possible to execute that plan of regulatory reform, of having actual government control, of elected officials actually controlling lawmaking and budget spending by government, which is the defining thing of most democracies, is that elected lawmakers control the government. But that's not how the government in Japan works. In Japan, the government runs itself basically through a bunch of tenured bureaucrats, and politicians are permitted to engage in a couple of isolated areas, that they might have personal sort of interests in for limited amounts of time, because they will be pushed out of those roles typically after very short tenures, especially if they want to actually do anything that upsets the bureaucrats. And the Democrats realized that even if they won the election, they couldn't do anything, because it would still be the same people running the government unless they not only won the election, but they seized control of the bureaucracy. And Hatoyama, as prime minister, frankly, Hatoyama was never that competent, but he was the prime minister of an administration where basically in the background you had Ichiro Ozawa with a baseball bat and all of his friends basically grabbing all of these factions that were at each other's throats and trying to kill each other. I mean, it's like the old, Life of Brian, the Palestinian liberation groups all fighting each other in front of the Romans, kind of a deal with the Japanese opposition. And Ozawa, for a short period of time, got them all to agree on, hey, let's just agree that we have to reform the bureaucracy. Completely fell apart in a heap. And it fell apart in a heap because all that Hatoyama really had to do was just keep his mouth shut and just walk, one left foot and then right through this whole period. But he couldn't, because he's an idiot. And he promised Okinawa that he would make the Americans understand that they should just move all their military bases, which, Hillary Clinton had a difference of opinion on. Still the most hilarious meeting I've ever seen in Japanese diplomatic history, seeing Hatoyama coming out pale and shaking after talking to Hillary Clinton, saying that, yeah, that thing where I promised we would persuade the Americans to move the base is not going to happen. Sorry, everybody, I'm resigning. That's a thing that happened. But yeah, Hatoyama is an idiot. Not as big of an idiot as the prime minister that came after him, Naoto Kan, both of which are less actually. Noda, who came after both of them, isn't as much of an idiot as Kan or Hatoyama, but he's not really an opposition guy. He actually completely reversed course on, he's like best friends with the bureaucracy, and even loves the LDP. Like, I don't even know why he was actually in the opposition in the first place, but he had stable running until the Democrats inevitably disappointed everyone and were kicked out resoundingly. But yeah, Hatoyama, apart from, I think his wife believes in UFOs and talks about that a lot, and he just says a lot of crazy stuff sometimes. He did say how the former prime minister took the time to say that people who are vaccinated are more likely to, 3 times more likely to catch COVID. And this actually had to be specifically called out by the digital ministers for that. Yeah, please stop spreading anti-vax misinformation, respected former prime minister and moron who believes in UFOs. Seriously. You've got Taro Aso and, Yoshiro Mori, and you think, seriously, Japanese politicians cannot get anybody would be better than this. And on that basis, they elected Hatoyama, and it turns out that he's the sort of person who would say that people are at more risk of getting COVID if they're not vaccinated, which is statistically and scientifically and factually wrong, and handing a softball. I mean, this is the sort of thing in a way. I mean, it's one thing to be called out by Taro Kono, who, like I say, generally takes the softballs and says easy common sense kind of populist things. This is the sort of thing they should have actually let an unpopular LDP. They should have let Taro Aso take this one and rip him to pieces on it, just to show that even Taro Aso looks smart next to this former Democrat prime minister, who is an embarrassment for saying this sort of thing. So yeah, that's where we're at with that. Into the comments briefly, we've got Dan H. Was I able to read and open those FT articles which you sent me on Twitter? I'm trying to remember. I think you sent me something where I could access them, and I'm trying to remember now what they were because it was like a month ago. I can't access FT articles in general, which is a problem. Obviously, I don't have an account, so I'm paywalled from that. I can read Nikkei articles. I do pay for Nikkei, but I don't pay for FT. I'm trying to remember what they were. So yeah, I'm sorry, I don't know. Yoni, good to have you. Our man from Finland in Tokyo. Good to have you with us. We've also got Nestor125. Yo, hello indeed. And Tracy Northcott, also a frightening human. Thing is, I mean, the thing with Taro Aso is, yes, I don't think he's frightening, actually. Frightening is someone who is, well, I mean, yes, you could say that, someone like him should never be allowed to be at the controls of running the country. I think the same in terms of competence of many other prime ministers, but I do like that Taro Aso never pretends to be anything that he's not. He never pretends to be smart, and he actually, when he was in opposition, I actually saw some great interviews with him where he was self-deprecating. He could laugh at himself and how stupid he was, and and how uncomfortable he was not being able to tell jokes. Thank heavens! I mean, even when he wasn't trying to tell jokes, he was a bit of I guess he's a bit of a George W. Bush character. Which now that we've had Trump, everybody looks back upon as being with a little bit of nostalgia, thinking, weren't those simpler times when we just had an idiot for a president, and not an evil person? Taro Aso's a bit like that, honestly. He's not. I think there are scarier things than him, but yes. He certainly shouldn't be deputy prime minister and minister of finance like he is. But there you go. Kubris Tenshi, yes, indeed. I do love that. Judea, of course. That's right. Not Palestine. But anyway, I do love that skit. Anyway, continuing on, we've got. This is a funny one again. This is just continuing that with the population declining and just Japanese people. Come on, I'm logged into that. With the population declining and just Japanese not looking after homes, and of course the problems with things like inheritance taxes and property taxes. There are just it's more expensive for homeowners to and particularly. There's so many factors here. Houses in Japan are not designed to last 100 years like they are in Australia or New Zealand. There'll be an earthquake, there'll be a fire. The tradition of Japanese houses is that you build them just to last 20 years. And because you know that they're only going to last 20 years, you don't spend money on putting high quality building materials. You don't spend money on maintenance. You let them kind of run down because you expect after 20 years they're going to be knocked down anyway. Also, another thing that factors into this is that in Japan, land is separate from fixtures upon it. In a lot of common law countries like UK, Australia, America, Canada, anything that's cemented to the land is part of the land. You can't separate a house from the land that it's on. But in Japan, you can. Land, the buildings on top of land are different to the land itself, and the land, which makes the land much more valuable than the buildings that are upon it, which means that when you have an elderly person pass away in a country town, typically those houses are falling apart when they die, and they're expensive to, and the cost of knocking down the house and building something new, just the cost of knocking it down and turning it back into a grass flat section, let alone building something new upon it or doing necessary renovation to make it livable again, is all prohibitive. Unless you actually have someone there living there who's continuously living there and planning to continue living there, and then it's just accepted that that's one of the costs. And again, you'll typically try to make money off the land by building more concentrated housing, building apartment blocks, which a lot of people have done, but there's more of those going up and the population is declining. So they're going up and they're empty, and the result is that Japan already has all of these akiya, these abandoned houses all over the place. In fact, ghost towns, abandoned towns now, where again, just because no one else is living there, no one wants to live in a town or a neighborhood like Japan's version of arguably sort of what you see images of Flint and Detroit during their worst periods, not with the crime, of course, but still houses with broken windows and boarded up and falling apart and overgrown front yards and stuff like that. And when you've got a couple of eyesores like that in the neighborhood, people want to move out, and that's what's causing a lot of these towns to sort of become like that. This is accelerating at the moment. And the thing is, you think, well, isn't that great? If there's an oversupply of housing, then houses should be cheap. It should be easy for young couples to be able to buy nice houses and raise children in them and so on. And that should be the case. However, the government, on the one hand, they do want to do something about all these abandoned houses that are freaking people out, and I think it's a wonderful opportunity for urban planning to be able to make parks and actually do some urban design to make towns attractive. But at the same time, if you actually were to make these houses as cheap as they should be, then house prices overall would collapse, which is still a fundamental basis, of course, of the whole banking economy in Japan. Everyone's mortgage is based on loans using properties as collateral. So if you allow house prices to fall too much, then the banks are all going to lose the collateral on the mortgages that they're giving out, which could endanger the economy. So there's a registry of these abandoned houses, which the government keeps. But they're not as cheap, and it's not as easy to be able to get one of these houses as it should be. There are people that do YouTube channels. In fact, I forget the name. If you remember who it is, put it in the comments. But there are YouTube channels based on going around and finding and doing up IKEA abandoned houses and selling them, and it's actually quite good money, although it's a hell of a lot of work, particularly when you consider again that a lot of houses are just not made well to begin with. I mean, they're earthquake standards and stuff like that, but they're missing things like insulation, double glazed glass, and so on, because no one wants to invest in those sort of materials when they don't expect the buildings to last. So yeah, you have a real problem in Japan at the moment. And while there are ideas of ways that you can do this, I think what typically happens in most countries is if a property is abandoned or a house is abandoned and no one's exercised ownership over it or paid taxes on it for a certain amount of time, the government or the city council will confiscate it, will take it over. And then they'll have the powers to knock it down and clean it up. And this is how this is resolved in a lot of countries. But in Japan, people are so militant about their property rights. I think it's actually linked to Japan never being colonized, for example, is that Japanese are very, very assertive going back hundreds of years. It's why so many towns in Japan have narrow roads, is that you cannot widen roads in Japan without paying massive compensation to people who are just giving a little section out the front of the yard. So, people do not want to give up an inch of their rights, even on abandoned properties or properties that they are not, paying taxes on and responsibly upkeeping. So, yeah, there are some things there where I think the solution is, of course, allowing governments to take these properties back and do them up and make them available and selling them cheap and letting people actually afford housing, which there should be if there are 10 million abandoned homes in Japan. And getting worse, but that's not the situation at the moment. The government's trying to basically stop that flood of abandoned housing from becoming something that deflates the entire real estate economy. And the result is, you hear about the occupancy rate of apartments in Tokyo is only something like 60% or 50%. Like even in apartment buildings, most of them are not occupied, and yet rents are not cheaper. So it's a fascinating problem. It's something that it does feel to me like things should be a lot better than this, but they're not. So yeah, really interesting problem. Anyway, I think it really is something that I feel like is a huge opportunity in here somewhere if someone could just figure it out. And I'm sure, again, you can understand the real estate. You think, why don't the real estate companies jump in this and make proposals? But the point is, they're afraid of their portfolios, losing all of their value. From allowing these to be sold at market prices. So even, they've got an incentive not to fix this problem. But then what do? You end up with a situation like in China where you have these abandoned cities just because banks and construction companies and real estate companies don't want to admit that they exist because it'll cause, the more lively parts of the economy to collapse. It's not as bad as China and it's different to the China problem, but it's a really interesting thing anyway. I think it's really scary what happens if it doesn't get resolved. Ben Duncan, good to have you with us. Indeed. Theodore Sharp, you'd like to rebuild a house. Well, you should check out, again, I can't remember the name of the YouTube channel, but there is a good YouTube channel that does that. And certainly, I think, particularly in the hot real estate markets, like in places like Florida and Queensland and Australia, Even my mum, for a time when the house prices were rocketing up, it was a real good way to make a lot of money, actually, was to buy houses, renovate them to increase their value and sell them while the price itself was going up. And you can make quite a big margin on properties. And my mum got quite good at renovating houses. I don't know how many she did, but I think she did like 6 or 7 or 8. I mean, physically, it takes a lot out of you. And I think it got a bit too much for her with time, but she did quite well on basically, renovating and flipping houses when the housing market was hot. But even doing it for yourself, and honestly, I love the idea of just building a house from scratch if I ever do that. The problem is I keep moving and I don't want to be committed to living in one place, but I love that idea myself. So yeah, much respect. I think that's actually a really good idea. So I think you should, yeah, there should be good options for it, particularly in rural parts of Japan. So it's definitely worth looking up. Theodore Sharp, let buy one of the houses and build a ninja house. Yeah, amen. I mean, seriously, like there's 10 million abandoned houses. Why not make 2 ninja houses? You can make a video game house. You can make a boxing house. You can make a ninja house. You can make a, geez, I mean, seriously, I wish that this opportunity, you know, I feel like there's an enormous opportunity here that's not being exploited. So yes, Tracy Northcote was trying to post the link, Akia and Inaka. I think that's the name of the channel, right? I know I've seen it before, so thank you for posting that, Tracy. And yeah, perhaps I won't do it live because I'll always mess something up. But yeah, definitely look up Akia and Inaka. I think it's worth checking out. There's a good YouTube channel on that anyway. Big announcement, which was actually made. This was this was a story ahead of the announcement. I think I've got another link for that. But of course, we are finally from October 11 going back to visa waiver, basically normal individual travel to Japan, again with requirements like, for example, having a certificate showing that you're triple vax and all of that, and still needing to wear masks and so on when you're in Japan, and still having the stupid My SOS app. So some bureaucracy, but not. Honestly, not a lot. Finally, great news, of course, that I saw the celebration video post going up when the announcement was made. That, yeah, people who are not in Japan and want to travel to Japan and just hang around, you can come. And if you're coming from the United States, everything is like on a 35 to 40% like sale at the moment. So, of course, everything except the air tickets to come here. But assuming that they'll start putting lots of planes on those routes and those prices will come down, it'll be awesome. If you're coming from overseas to Japan, and one, you can come here finally for the first time in years, and two, when you come here, everything will be like super cheap. It'll be like, seriously, going to like a developing country, which Japan is rapidly like becoming, like no joke, in terms of at least cost. Yeah, it'll be awesome for people looking to come in. Not so much fun for people who can go out but can't afford to do anything when they go out, but awesome for people coming in. So that is good news. And you know what? It's going to be great for the Japanese economy. It's going to be disruptive, having lots of foreigners without masks running around making nuisances of themselves. But the economy needs the money so desperately. And the fact that everything is, again, with the currency, if, the Bank of Japan just went and bought a whole bunch of yen to try to increase the value of it. But it sank again because it has no value, because there's no reason for people overseas to buy yen. We'll let tourists in. I mean, it's just one way you can have lots of people buying yen, is wanting to come here and spend it. So, and Japan is the only place you can really use yen. So I long overdue, and actually a resolution to a bunch of problems. So that is some awesome news. Kind of a minor thing, but I still think that that having two-way charging, like vehicle to grid charging on cars, on electric cars, it's funny, I haven't owned a car since I came to Japan. 23 years I have not owned a car, and yet I still enjoy watching videos about cars and following the tech, and I find the EV tech is super interesting. And I actually think within cars, the most exciting tech around EVs, there's a bunch around the batteries and self-driving technology I talk about a lot, but vehicle to grid charging, the ability to have a grid operator treat all of the electric cars that are connected to a charger to be able to use those as storage for the grid. basically that opens up all sorts of possibilities. The biggest problem with renewables, for example, is the fact that it's intermittent. You don't know, the wind blows and stops and blows and stops, and you have to be precise about when you allow electricity to go into the grid and how much, which means a lot of that generation is either done when it's not needed and it's wasted, or it's not enough. But if you can capture all of that excess generation at times when it's not needed in batteries, the more storage that you get in the grid, the more you can install intermittent renewable sources of energy and have cleaner energy. At the moment, they have to limit how much wind power they put in because they don't want it to overgenerate. So they have to they're limited to only installing like what they think the maximum input will be. Whereas when you can tolerate excess generation and store it in batteries, that actually means that you can install lots more clean energy. And cars are going to be like being able to use cars as like a big distributed battery that can store all of this excess power generation is going to unlock just basically a lot less emissions from power generation. And it's funny, Teslas do not allow two-way charging. I hope that they do soon. But again, Japanese companies, just like being the first EV companies, like the Leaf being among the first mass-produced and mass-sold EVs, everyone thinks at this point, just like they think that Apple invented the MP3 player, Tesla, a lot of people probably think now that Tesla invented electric EVs, and of course it's not the case. Nissan was out there before a lot of them, and Nissan has this technology which, when you think about situations where, having the ability to power your house, when there's been an earthquake or a power outage from your car, being able to use these massive batteries in cars for emergencies is great. And when you think about what it can be done on the entire grid scale, it's actually, like world-changing, actually. So this is something that I really hope becomes standard in all cars, and it's really cool that Japan's leading the way on that technology, and it makes sense here. Cobras Tenshi, thanks to so little tourists, my mother was able to rent hotel rooms in Tokyo for 6 weeks to get all the things sorted with your sister's situation. Very glad to hear that. There is a good video on bidirectional charging and how it can be implemented, but it's in German. And it does have some drawbacks at the moment, such as double taxing. It's a new thing, and they'll figure it out. There are many good YouTube channels as well, which sort of cover this sort of thing. I'm sure that there are good German videos on it as well. And I do love caption videos on YouTube, particularly if they're on really interesting subjects like that. So yeah, Theodore Sharp, prepare to buy electrical motorcycles. Well, that's another one. Actually, by the way, battery swapping, there's all sorts of cool technologies around this stuff. But yeah, that's a really cool one. 12 minutes, we can do this. Just another thing that there's been a lot of chatter about lately. Super wonderful that there's more and more, AI generative art coming online lately. Stable Diffusion is basically like a software package which you can install on your own local computer or make available online. There's various versions that are available that I've loved playing with. And of course, the famous one, DALL-E, based on GPT-3, that recently became generally available, and I signed up for that like right away. You get a limited number of free uses of it per month. But this is basically where you ask, you tell in text, you just describe, draw me a picture of a cat riding a bicycle in, 17th century classical impressionist style, and it will show you like 4 proposed images that match your description generated by an intelligent AI that draws the picture for you based on your description. And it's remarkably good what it can do. It's really surprising what it can do. And I love the art that you can generate with it. And it's funny, I see immediately all sorts of criticism that, this is going to be the end of art, when you're going to be able to generate art just by telling a computer to make an image of something that looks really polished. And of course, all of the questions about, well, where is it pulling that AI from? Is it actually copying art in the background? And, when you create an image that's basically based on copying like 20 different images and remixing those images, does that generated image owe like copyright licensing or whatever? What if some of those images that the AI algorithm learned from are copyrighted? Do they owe a license to the source materials for that? All sorts of tricky questions come up around this. But in terms of people feeling like this is cheating, and art communities, looking to ban them completely immediately, this is like every technological innovation in history. This is like people, being opposed to electric guitars being used in music. This is like I remember when I learned to DJ using vinyl records, and I remember when CDJs came out, that you could beat tap and so on, and you could beat match digitally. And then when computers came out that could just automatically beat match, which sort of took away the whole. Literally, that was like the musical DJ equivalent of being a painter who could manipulate your records with pressure on your hands, which took months to learn how to do well. And suddenly a computer could do it for you automatically. It was the same level of disruption. And my opinion on all of these technologies, that come out, that help with, basically now you can create videos, you can create audio. Tron. It's ironic that the first ever CG graphics using major movie Tron was not even nominated for a special effects award, because it was considered in 1982 or whenever it was released that using computers, they assumed back then that was just like AI generation, and somehow it was cheating to use computers. Ironically, the most groundbreaking computer generated CG. You think all special effects awards nowadays are based on use of CG, yet the original and the most groundbreaking use of it was actually blacklisted from receiving an award, because at the time the technology was new and scary and seen as cheating. This is exactly the same as that. This is a tool. This is the fact that it makes it easier to generate a base art. It's not. Well, one, it's going to make it a lot more accessible for a lot more people to generate the art that's inside their head. They're not going to, at the moment it is limited, I suppose, to some extent, to people that have the skills to be able to draw well, and not everybody has the skills to be able to generate the sort of art that they want to see, or that they would commission or ask a painter to make. Now they can make that themselves. More people can make great artistic images, and they can use that as a base to do further editing. They can use it to sketch out ideas, or they could use it to publish. And if you're good at using it, at the end of the day, what matters is the end product, right? This is just another tool to get what's in your head, creatively onto a canvas, onto a digital sort of a thing. So I think all that this is going to do is it's just going to make it easier and more accessible, and free up time to focus on other stuff that you might not have had the time to focus on before. That's how I see it with DJing. And yeah, I think it's actually a wonderful thing. And the fact that it's getting banned is just a sign that this is a compelling technology, because that's what's happened with pretty much every other leap forward in, electronic music, in terms of, special effects in movies and so on. Yeah, it's good that it's being condemned. That shows that it's probably good. As discussed before, just wonderful, of course, that Japan is reopening to visa-free tourism, so that is a great thing. Yeah, I would say this summarizes my view of the whole Abe funeral debate controversy. Doi suru, whatever. Yeah, I get it that Abe is hated by people who hate him. I talked about this before I went away. However, and look, the opposition to, and I pointed out, actually, I didn't go too far with this because it would have been obnoxious to point it out. But, the opposition to Abe's funeral, like 60 to 70%, is the same kind of statistics of, Tokyo taxpayers being opposed to the Olympics, is the same as, Japan is pretty anti by default. People prefer that tax money not be, spent on anything if they're asked. While I think this was badly handled, and of course, all the more awkward because state funerals or taxpayer, public event funerals are not really a thing in Japan. They're relatively rare. At the same time, if you do it ever, Japan's longest serving prime minister surely qualifies, even if you don't like the guy. In the end of the day, the guy did win elections, to hold on to power all of that time. And even if, you dislike that person, violently, as some people did, I mean, I think one person set himself on fire in protest. That, in the end of the day, when the person's dead, how far do you go with expressing a political opinion about someone who at least has credentials to justify a state funeral as a statesman, regardless of what you personally think? And I think, yeah, it actually got ugly and kind of mortifying, frankly, to anyone looking out who doesn't see a state funeral as being unusual. And, again, I think that particularly when the far left in Japan goes, I mean, the fact that even when Abe wasn't running anymore, even when he wasn't prime minister anymore, the far left would still campaign based on saying whoever followed. Suga is basically a henchman for Abe, and it's just a continuation. For them, it was always a personality and a personal, like literally like Abe being like Hitler to the far left in Japan, and I think it made them look really bad. It's literally like this headline says, and I thought long before Abe even died that the left needed to move beyond saying that Abe is the devil about everything, even when he's gone, and focusing on what they have to offer as a positive message. But they fall back into this, and even with the funeral, this is why the left in Japan is incredible. And I don't support the LDP, and I'm literally of the school that anyone would be better than the LDP other than the opposition. They're all none of the above is the most popular. This is why none of the above is the most consistently high polling party in polls, because you have a hardcore 20% of the population that will go for this, but they'll never win power because they freak the rest of the country out with just how vehement they are on their opposition to basically everything. So and I think it's kind of a shame that they needed to let go of this. It was going to happen anyway, and yes, they're against it. I do think it made sense. I do think that the LDP, of course, and Kishida handled the whole thing. They should have done it quickly. They should have. They should not have. They should have tried to make it as apolitical as possible, which they didn't do, obviously. So they, I guess they didn't see the point in not making it apolitical, since they knew they were going to get the same amount of criticism anyway. But they still should have tried to do that with a view to the future. But so it was handled badly. But most of the protesters wouldn't have been any different about it anyway, and I think it reflects as much on the protesters, frankly, as what they're protesting about. So I'm glad that it's done, and I'm glad that I was away. In fact, I think I just got back to Japan when they had the funeral, but I'm glad that it's over anyway. As I just mentioned before, all of these tourism resuming should finally be a bit of a GDP boost, just based on the currency being so devalued at the moment. Another big thing that happened, of course, just a few days ago, I think actually, Japan and the People's Republic of China celebrated 50 years of ties. 1972, Japan established pretty much just after Nixon did the deal to switch recognition from the Republic of China, which is now Taiwan, to the People's Republic of China. Basically, 30, well, not 30 years, was it? It was about 25 years after the fact, when basically America continued, and Japan, following America, continued to pretend that the Republic of China that governed China after World War II was still the government of China and had China's seat, permanent seat on the UN Security Council of the United Nations, up until 1972, when finally they gave up on what was frankly a fiction, that the Republic of China was in fact the legitimate government that was in control of China, and recognized that the People's Republic of China is the government of China. And of course, this whole dichotomy that at least up until that point in time, both the People's Republic of China and the Republic of China, claimed to be the government of all of China, including Taiwan and mainland China together. And it's taken even longer, frankly, for even the Republic of China, Taiwan, to sort of shift its position to now being more comfortable saying, okay, we're the Republic of China. We are the government that moved to Taiwan from China, and we think that we are still legitimately, the legitimate government of mainland China. But we recognize that we only have sovereign control over Taiwan, and they're shifting towards being Taiwanese, which of course is the whole origin of that whole sort of spat with mainland China wanting to make sure that they get the whole kit and caboodle eventually. However, that marked a pretty optimistic time for Japan, that connecting with China, mainland China. Mainland China was so desperate for the recognition, it waived reparations, for example, like of the sort that Japan paid to South Korea. However, although there was never expressly a deal done that Japan would pay reparations to China for World War II as overseas development aid, Japan paid a lot of overseas development aid. Yeah, it was sort of a quid pro. It was sort of, I think, understood that way, that although Japan wasn't paying war reparations, it was going to basically pay for the economic development of China post Cultural Revolution from the 70s through the 80s and 90s. And you must say, they actually, that was set up actually in 1980, I think, and it ran for 42 years. They're just wrapping it up now. And now, of course, China itself has become a massive aid donor to developing countries. But yeah, Japan for a long time in that development was very optimistic that if it built up China's economy, one, it could be a market for Japanese products, as well as, of course, it could be a place where Japan could cheaply make its own products and to compete even more effectively against America. And was, of course, optimistic with all of the resources and population and everything of China. That by having good relations with China, that it could strengthen Japan. And yeah, seeing all the documentaries talking about Japan's relationship with China, really, of course, the most interesting turning point in this was the Tiananmen Square massacre in 1989. And it was interesting in the Tiananmen Square massacre of 1989 that Japan diverged from other Western nations that were uniformly condemning of the massacre of students, unarmed students in Tiananmen Square by the Chinese regime, where Japan's analysis at the time, and this is all now just becoming declassified, Japan's analysis at the time was they were afraid that if they were too tough and joined Western sanctions on China over the massacre, that it would empower conservative factions within the Chinese Communist Party and would actually, make it. Japan was still optimistic even during the Tiananmen Square massacre that through engagement and through, making China better off, that it would still promote democratization and normalization of China. Obviously, that hasn't worked out that way, and particularly since 2000, when China became more stridently nationalist, and particularly with disputes in the East China Sea over the Senkaku Islands, things have really sort of gone off the rails, and China's become ardently anti-Japanese, particularly in the last 20 years, in a standout sort of a way that, yeah, things at the moment are not in a good state, and it's hard to see how they'll go back, because China, a little bit like Russia, is kind of writing checks with its nationalist mouth that its military asks really thinks it can sign, but it cannot. The hope is it won't end up, and obviously everybody worrying now that it's slowly moving into a situation like we have with Russia and Ukraine, which I hope China's taking notes on what's happening in Ukraine and doesn't make the same mistakes. But yeah, what should have been a big year of mutual celebrations, and even when I first came to Japan in the late 1990s, the China relationship with Japan was good and very played up and very prominent. And there are a lot of Chinese people in Japan living in Japan, and that relationship has really declined a lot, particularly in the last 15 years. And that is a shame. The relationship with Japan is a really big lever that's maybe underestimated by the rest of the world of helping China to become a normal, good global citizen. But China specifically, in relations to Japan, seems to be turning its back on that. So that's a real shame. So yeah. Couple stories left. One, just an interesting little bit of a progress that it still is ridiculous that even where marijuana is proven to be medicinally beneficial for things like glaucoma, I believe, and I think it has benefits for certain illnesses like rheumatism and arthritis, and I believe epilepsy. I'm not sure, but I know it has legitimate medical uses that have been recognized for a long time, even in parts of America, which have been stridently anti-marijuana for a long time. In Japan, again, where the plant was not only native, and Japan had a massive hemp industry, even post-war, and the industry was personally patronized by the emperor himself, who promised hemp farmers in Japan that he would protect them from GHQ introduced restrictions on hemp and cannabis, that even medicinal uses of marijuana remain banned in Japan. However, Japan is paying attention, I think, to what's happening in the legalization and normalization of the plant in other parts of the world, and hopefully allowing medical products is perhaps the first step in helping to help Japan just progress a little bit and having a bit more of a common sense policy on this. I already mentioned before I did a great show last night that you should check out, talking about the Gaian development in particular and her activism on opposing particularly poorly thought out and environmentally harmful urban redevelopments with Rochelle Kopp last night. So that was a lot of fun. And part of that discussion, the final story that I have, is, yeah, I was surprised to learn this actually happened while I was overseas, that the decision on the final form of the new rugby stadium, Chibunomiya, the sort of the hallowed sacred ground, the main ground for rugby in Japan is of course in Gaien. It's right in the center of Tokyo. It's actually in the Meiji Gaien facility, and it's a 27,000 person. Most Japanese sports stadiums suck because they have a running track around them, which means that you're seated so far away from the players that you can't really enjoy the game very well. But Shibunomiya is a dedicated rugby ground where you can sit right beside the ground. You can see the players really well. It's a very intimate stadium, but it's a really fun place to watch games. And it's right in the heart of Tokyo. And it's where, in spite of only having 27,000 seating capacity, and when New Zealand played Australia in a Bledisloe Cup match in Tokyo, they played it at the Kokuritsu Kyogijo, and they got a 100,000 seat stadium filled for that. So in a way, it's a little bit of a waste that they play it in such a that their top ground only has 27,000 people, and the ground there is grass, but grass is very hard to maintain particularly in winter, when rugby is played in Japan because it's so dry. And the ground doesn't look good. Honestly, it's not as well maintained as a lot of international grounds, but they do a lot to look after it. And it is basically when Japanese talk about wanting to become a national representative at rugby, the dream of every Japanese rugby player is to play on the grass of Shibunomiya. It does have a bit of a sacred status within rugby in Japan. It was surprising to me that, I thought that the redevelopment plan for the stadium was going to be that they would increase seating so it could meet World Cup standards, where it's required to have, I believe, at least like 50 or 60,000 seats to be able to be used in a Rugby World Cup. So it didn't meet the criteria for the Rugby World Cup. There were no Rugby World Cup games there when the Rugby World Cup was held in Japan. And I thought they were going to use this redevelopment of Meiji Jingu or Meiji Gaien to be able to develop that stadium, but it turns out what they're doing is they're actually reducing the capacity to 15,000 people. So that's pretty much writing off. I mean, I don't know, even club games get more seats than that. So they're losing the opportunity to sell a lot of rugby tickets. On the upside, it will have a roof, which means it'll be a lot more pleasant. You won't have the sun in your eyes or fighting the weather to watch games. So I like the fact that it'll be under a roof. But it'll be on an AstroTurf ground, and that will allow the facility to be basically to use the floor without damaging a grass pitch, that you'll be able to have concerts and use it for other purposes. I'm not against AstroTurf pitches. They make a lot of sense in Tokyo. I've played on them, but again, if you want your center of Japanese, your spiritual center of Japanese rugby, isn't on a grass ground. I kind of get the opposition to that as well. I talked about that with Rochelle last night. I love the idea of having a covered stadium on AstroTurf in Tokyo where I can conveniently watch international games. I'm okay with that, although I do wonder if the Japan Rugby Football Union really was okay. They have signed off on the plan, but all indications are is that because they don't own the land that's being used for that stadium, they were forced to go along with the plans of the developers, which was to make a multi-use facility. That involved a lot of compromises. So, yeah, I was surprised at that. I still, when it's built, I do like new stuff. I will go and watch games there. I'm looking forward to seeing what the experience of watching games there is like. I still would prefer to watch a game, frankly, in a small stadium that's close to the action than I would like to go to Yokohama Stadium, where you can sit 80,000 people, but you can barely make out what's happening on the field. But it's really surprising to me that, yes, indeed, particularly as Rochelle shared this link with me, the debate about whether it's really okay to play on AstroTurf. I'm less fussed about that because, honestly, the grass was not well maintained at Shibunomiya. But, yeah, it's surprising to me that they came to that result, particularly as a rugby fan myself, Auckland Blues, who I went and saw play. And I saw the Sunwolves beat Auckland at Shibunomiya Stadium. So, yeah, I do hope I get to see more rugby there, but that was a surprise. I've pushed through, as usual. I'm 10 minutes over. I've just finished the subjects. 20 viewers, 14 likes. Do like if you've enjoyed the video. I'm going to go through a final sweep of the comments to see. I don't see any orange there, so that's pretty good. It's just Kerberos Tenchi on bidirectional charging. I see Sean Bro. Long time no see. Sean Bro, good. Nice to see you there in the comments. Hope that you're well. Awesome to have you in here, actually. Who else is in here? We've got scrolling down quickly. Tracy Northcote. Yeah, the thousands of police and so on. I was working that day. I didn't see any of the chaos, but I thought it was, again, there's a place and a time to protest, and I thought that was just Japan's left going a little bit loopy over that, going a bit too far. Oh yeah, I didn't even mention the Queen dying, but yeah, the Queen died. Queen of New Zealand, Queen of Australia, Queen of Canada. Um, Ridiculous, of course, to even have queens and kings in the first place, let alone from a different country who barely even remember that they are the queen of your country. I think I do want New Zealand to be a republic, but i.e. not have a monarch. But it will probably be the last country in the Commonwealth to give up the queen. I think Australia will go first, but we'll see. Crypto Airy. Hey, Crypto Airy, good to have you in here. Nice to be back, and thank you for the welcome back. I do appreciate it. If that's aimed at me. Videos to Akiko, good to have you in here. And took your first motorcycle lessons today. Congratulations. Hemp was making ropes for warships. Yes, indeed, Crypto Area. In fact, it's actually one of the accounts that I've read is that the whole Japan war effort, the uniforms, all of the sheets, the bedding, everything that was basically cloth from World War II for the whole Japan war effort was based on Japanese hemp. It was everywhere. And it was actually seen as a way for the Americans. By banning hemp, they could then force Japan to import and use American synthetic materials like rayon and so on. And so it was actually seen as something that GHQ did to sort of give a leg up to new industries in America, forcing Japan to buy their stuff by banning hemp. You see, it's a government conspiracy, man. They should let in the hemp. But it sounds legit. It sounds legit. In fact, even the Zero planes, I think, were actually covered in like, they built them with like wooden frames and they covered them with like hemp. Like those planes, as I understand, I don't think you could smoke them. But but the planes, I mean, the hemp was extensively used in the war effort and to actually great effect. So which would probably shock a lot of Japanese because it's so stigmatized. But you are absolutely right, Crypto Airy. Coming down, I think that's all of the comments. So thank you for keeping me company. It is 11:42 Japan Standard Time, so I'm going to wrap it up. Do have a good week, everybody. I'm going to be back here next week because I will be back to having nothing better to do. I do appreciate you spending this time with me. Do like if you like the video because I do appreciate that. And remember, follow me on Twitter if you want to keep up with me during the week and just talk about stuff. And look out because I do want to do I don't know, around the end of the year, if people are up for it, I want to do a meetup. I'd love to hear maybe on Twitter, maybe in the chat next week what people think about that. But it'd be really cool if we can meet up with some people. And yeah, have a good week, everybody. Stay safe. Don't catch the Rona. We're down to like 2,000 cases per day at the moment in Tokyo, which is still bad in some ways, but good in others when you think about where it was soon. So yeah, it's been a good week. Anyway, boom. Have a good one. See you next week. Peace. Any stream. Boom.